If you were watching the news over the weekend, you no doubt heard about the shooting that was at LAX airport. Paul Ciencia charged with murder of a federal officer and committing violence at an international airport, that being LAX. To talk more about all of this and is any of this stuff working, is David Hyde, security consultant, David Hyde and Associates, and he's with us now. Good afternoon, David. How are you today?
Great, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for taking the time to join us. Obviously, we've heard of the shooting at LAX. It seemed that this person was a disgruntled expatriate who decided that he didn't like the way security was working and he wanted to go in and kill anybody involved in that or police. Are we safe? I noticed one interesting point from another person who's in the same business that you are in, David, and they said most of the focus is on arming checkpoint guards, and if a perpetrator is allowed to get that far, we've lost already. What are your thoughts on that statement?
Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of truth in that, but I think that there's a bigger picture here. And I think we need to look at, where we've come from in terms of airport security, back to 9/11, essentially, which is when everything changed, as you know. And we moved from, the old model to the new model where we have much tighter security all the way through, you might call it the chain, in terms of passengers arriving through to getting on the airplanes.
Are we worried more about protecting the airplanes and not enough about protecting the people inside the airport?
Well, I mean, the primary objective in terms of the airport screening and airport, the whole screening function there is to keep ammunition and guns and off the planes. But of course, airports are very large gathering areas, and there's long been concern, Scott, about the vulnerability of big groups of people in airports, because you see, of course, airports are designed to have open sight lines. We don't want there to be garbage receptacles where an IED might be hidden. We don't want there to be lots of nooks and crannies. But when you have that environment that's very open, it can also be, of course, very difficult for people to get out of harm's way if we have an incident occur. So I think that this incident that's happened now really gives us a look in to see how is the system working. And I think you could argue on this case, I think there's good and bad here that show that some of the elements came together quite well, but there are opportunities to improve.
It seems that, will we ever get ahead of this? It always seems we're reactionary. Like, for example, if someone tries to blow up something in their underwear and their shoes, then we got to start taking off our shoes. If something happens like what happened at LAX, then it rejigs everything. I mean, it seems that we're always one step behind. Are we?
I think to a certain extent, Scott, yes. And it's just, unfortunately, it's the nature of security threats and risks that sometimes the people that wield the decisions have to see something bad happen or a near miss to show them or demonstrate that these kind of things can happen. Before 9/11, there was plenty of intelligence out there for governments and airlines to know that the airliners were targets. But it took an event like 9/11 to make that sea change. And it's very similar with mass shootings, the response to active shooter incidents. It takes incidents to occur, unfortunately, to bring people to the table, to work out the best possible responses. But I think there's one important thing to keep in mind here, Scott, which is there is no such thing as total security. Mm-hmm. And we're always balancing, yes, we want to have good security based on the risks, based on the threats, but there are operational efficiencies. The public won't put up with a certain amount of going too far in terms of sacrificing their liberty. The privacy issues, the cost of all this, burdened often to the taxpayer. So it really is a balancing act, and that balancing act is changing all the time, and each incident that happens goes into further thinking to refine the approach taken to these areas of security, Scott.
Could one of these changes being arming every security guard at LAX or these airports? And as a matter of fact, I'm kind of surprised that there was an unarmed security guard at LAX.
Well, essentially here, Scott, we're talking about two different groups of employees with different mandates. The TSA agents are screeners.
Right.
They are not there to neutralize threats, i.e. human threats.
Good point.
They certainly are there to identify behavioral indicators. They've had their mandate stretched in the States, and here we have CATSA, and we have contract security screeners doing the exact same thing. and their mandate in Canada is also being broadened to include watching the masses in airports for behavioral indicators that they may have a nefarious intent to do something that's abnormal, etc. But the screening group is there primarily to stop explosives and guns getting onto airplanes. Now, these people are paid less than cops. Their training is far different. I don't think there's a lot of mileage to be had from looking at arming these agents who are essentially working in a very confined area in a security checkpoint. What happened in LAX was they used to have LAPD who were assigned to the airport. They used to, up until last year, and I remember I went through there last year, they had cops in the security checkpoints, but the chief of police here just mentioned yesterday that they stopped doing that a year ago, and they started to have the police doing broader patrols. So if you want, they're still fairly close to the checkpoint, but they're not actually stationed there. So you may ask the question, well, might we have seen a quicker response? But I think you could argue here that the police intercepted this individual fairly quickly and probably made this situation be less impactful than it could have been, Scott.
If it's not about arming more people, is it about greater intelligence?
Well, I think we have a fairly good handle in terms of intelligence for threats, and we've seen intercepted terrorism plots here in Canada. We've seen it in the United States. And, what we're talking about here, this type of threat where we call it a lone wolf, somebody who has an axe to grind that maybe is simmering away for a long time, maybe has psychological or mental health issues that eventually bubbles over. Typically, these people show indicators, as this man did, and apparently it was very close to him being intercepted by police before he got his ride to LAX and perpetrated this crime. But, I don't think it's a matter of intelligence. In my mind here, the whole idea, Scott, of airport security is called ringed defense. It's defense in depth. And the Israelis, the way they do it, they look at security right from when you drive onto the airport grounds. They've got people and technology watching the behavioral indicators of vehicles coming in. How are people arriving at the airport? Where are they parking? Why are they parking there? Why are they coming in through this entrance? Why didn't they go to that ticket gate? And they're kind of watching the behavioral cues of people. Now, we don't have that system in North America. TSA are looking at behavioral indicators now, so it's starting over there, and so are we here in Canada with CATSA, but we're not there yet in terms of that whole infrastructure.
Would Canadians or North Americans put up with the level of security that you're seeing in places like Israel? And if so, why wouldn't we just have all of that here?
I don't think for a minute that Canadians or Americans would put up with the level of security that they have in Israel. The threat profile is very different, and the public whole thought process and culture in terms of security and safety is very different.
Right.
But I think there is room to extend the sphere of influence that the airport operators have and the security and police on the environment. And it's all about trying to stay one step ahead and having a very flexible, nimble security system. What you see, Scott, is that all of these airport security plans are very scalable. The minute that the authorities get wind of a threat, they're able to ramp up security very quickly. And you'll see these extra pieces come into play. I think the question now that this incident raises is, what is that equilibrium? Has this incident showed a possible inherent vulnerability in terms of the non-secure portions of airports? And do we now need in North America to look at this a little bit differently and perhaps look at adapting the security strategy we put around these other parts of the airport?
We've talked before about these soft threats as opposed to something like an airliner or what have you. We've certainly seen this lately: shopping malls, airports, the Boston Marathon bombing. Do we have to be more aware of this, and could there be something in the design that has to change? I mean, has it got to that point where now we're going to be putting panic rooms in shopping malls?
Well, I mean, I think that the way that buildings are being designed now tends to often, not always, but often take into account the type of, designing crime and designing threats out. and making it much more conducive so people can find safe refuge. People can get out quick if there's an incident or even like a fire situation, for example. We've seen some of the warehouse fires in Asia that have been very devastating. So the building design, I think, is changing a little, and I'm pleased with that. I think really what this speaks to, Scott, largely is that as a society, I think we are becoming more attuned with social media to the type of threats, unfortunately, that are milling among us. And it really, in my view, it's a collective understanding that we all have a network of people that we deal with, and the vast majority of those folks are normal, everyday folks, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes people have things happening in their lives. This can be someone who suddenly starts to behave very differently. They start to say different things, do different things, talk about suicide possibly, talk about harming people, talk about firearms, having a fixation on guns or on violence. These are the kind of things that need to be brought forward to responsible authorities. It can be school authorities, could be a college or a university, it could be the police, it could be a parent. But this is the kind of collective shift in thinking that I believe is already taking place to a degree and needs to take place even more.
Have we lost that over time? Have we just become distant from everybody we know and we just choose not to get involved? Is that a result of all of this, do you think?
I think sometimes there can be a tendency to be a little bit arm's length to it, but I just don't think that in the kind of social media age that we live, where so much of our lives are kind of out there, it's hard. It's harder now to live a private life, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So I think that there's more of an opportunity now. Let's just look at Facebook and look at Twitter and the various forums where angry people can express those views, and they can hit a trigger for individuals that are monitoring or watching. But, it really talks to the idea of collective responsibility, and it's not the police and the authorities will not solve all of this, and we need as society and as citizens to be responsible, kind of look out for one another, and when things are happening that are concerning, they need to be brought forward.
An FBI agent said of this, quote, "Our goal is to do a true scrub on the individual to find out what was the tipping point for this person." Why that?
Well, they always want to work back and find out what made this person go over the edge. And the reason to do that, of course, is because there may very well be other people like this individual who have had similar stimuli, be it external or internal, and would break in a similar way. And it seems in this case that this individual has some kind of a conspiracy theory mentality around government, around, kind of a new world order, if you will, of one currency. We've seen a bit of that in the news here and there. And this person had a worldview that was very different from yours and mine and other people's, and where it got to the stage where it hit critical mass and this person became violent. Always we see, Scott, in these cases of shooters like this, that in virtually every case, something broke the camel's back, and there was an incident or an occurrence or a rejection or something happened, and this person changed into something different or manifested into into violence. And that's why I'm saying the police aren't watching everybody in society, although some of the news recently, I think people are watching a bit more than we know. But we need to be aware of this, and I think everyone listening to your show here, not trying to be alarmist at all. The vast majority of people aren't like this, of course, but if we're seeing and hearing things that are of a concern, we need to bring it forward. It needs to have light shone on it.
David Hyde has been with us, security consultant, David Hyde and Associates. David, thanks as always insightful. You take care.
You too, Scott.